And joining us in our first session, this morning's conversation is on the evolving economic landscape of the Middle East and the emerging challenges and the opportunities in the travel and tourism sector. We have some interesting and fascinating speakers who would share their insight, very valuable, and then it's also exciting that it's moderated by Samir Hashim of BBC World News. Please welcome and join me in welcoming them all onto stage. We've got Samir Hashmi from BBC World News, Dr. Talib Rifai, Chairman of ITIC and former Secretary General of UNWTO, who will be joining us virtually from Amman, Nicholas Meyer, Global Tourism Leader of PwC, and Scott Livermore, Chief Economist of Oxford Economics, Middle East. Thank you all. So we decided that we've seen a few shy audiences who are shy to come forward to ask their questions live on the microphone that we've put for them in the middle of the room. So I will have a WhatsApp number up on the screen. Please share your comments and questions, and I shall share them with your panel. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this opening session on day 4 of Arabian Travel Market. And it's good to see so many people face to face finally after more than a year. Now, I've got a very erudite panel here to discuss the next subject, what we're discussing today, the changing or the evolving economic landscape of the Middle East, and what does it mean for travel and tourism in terms of opportunities. So let's get just started with the subject right away. And I have Dr. Rifai. Do we have Dr. Rifai with us?
Of course.
Yes. Good morning, Dr. Rifai. Can you hear us? Good to have you.
Good morning. I can hear you very well.
Yes.
Thank
good.
you.
So let me begin with you, Dr. Rifai. I know it's the obvious question, but just to put it into perspective, give us a sense as to how has the last 1.5 years or since COVID impacted the travel and tourism industry, specifically in the Middle East?
Let me start by saying the following. 4 years ago, I was interviewed by a Portuguese newspaper, and they asked me at the time, how do I assess that moment? At the moment, Trump has just been elected and he imposed some travel restrictions. And there was Brexit, there were terrorists. I said tourism will be negatively affected for sure, but it will come back. And it did within a year to the way it was. Today, we're living in a different world. It's a different moment in time. I don't think things will come back the way they were. They will leap forward. We will not be going back to where we started. It's a new world. It's a new norm. It's a new beginning for mankind altogether. I believe in that completely. I believe that new world would be a world more sustainable, more fair, more equitable. Now, why is that? It is because the world is now, the old system is falling apart in some way. The multilateral system, as we knew it, is not operating anymore. Look at the EU. We can't have a country that is insisting on having quarantines, another country that is next to it that is demanding a vaccine passport, and a third country in the same region that's also only says I do 72 hours testing, and a testing will be when you enter the country. All of this means the world worlds of the governments of the world must come together. They must work together. There is no sense in any country working on its own anymore, no matter how good the country does. The trick is how to work together as a region first with our neighborhood, and then we move into the international scene. Without that, we will never be able to get anywhere, because that's the nature of travel and tourism. Travel and tourism brings people together. People cannot come together until and unless they are harmonized in their procedures and their way of dealing with matters and things. That's what I want to say, that starter, and then have many other thoughts. We continue doing that as we go along. Thank you so much, sir. I wish I was with you.
Scott, let me get you in first. And before we get into the specifics about the travel and tourism industry, and Nicholas could be able to delve on that. Give us a sense of how has the last 1 year been for the Middle Eastern economies, because it was just not COVID. There were also crashing oil prices, which had an impact on the overall economic landscape of this region.
Yeah, that's right, Samir. The Middle East really got hit by a double whammy. Firstly, we had oil prices which were negative for a day or so, but clearly, when oil is such an important contributor to government finances, that had a significant impact on what the governments could do in supporting the economy. And on top of that, if you combine that to the hit to travel and tourism, as we saw from Jared's numbers, they're a significant contribution to the economy as a whole. And when the bottom falls out of that market, there's a significant impact to the economy, and we saw some deep recessions. Some facts and figures. If you look at the non-oil economy, so take away the contribution of oil, we saw declines in non-oil GDP of 6 to 7% in the UAE, Bahrain, Oman. Qatar and Saudi Arabia held up a little bit better, but still significant falls. And that is once in a lifetime recessions.
Nicholas, I mean, I want to get you in on specifically travel and tourism, because it's very, as Scott was also mentioning, these are important pillars for some of the economies, including the UAE, especially Dubai, where we are sitting right now. From that point of view, just give a sense to the audience how significant really is travel and tourism for this part of the world. Because usually what comes to your head is when you talk about the Middle East or the Gulf is oil. But there are some countries that really rely on travel and tourism in a substantial way, right?
Sure. So first of all, that's exactly right. Many of the economies here in the region, defining on whether you say GCC or Middle East, have perhaps some oil, but perhaps not to the extent of some of the really large producers, right? So those, and Dubai is part of them, places, touristically traditional places such as Jordan, Egypt, and so on as well. So for them, this has always been a mainstay, and a very important one that at times took up to 1/3 of the official and perhaps also unofficial GDP of the economy, so substantial. Also, for those that have an oil platform or have oil as a revenue, you got to remember that a lot of travel is required to actually make your oil trade work, right? So travel and tourism, the way it is restricted right now, does not just touch our 2 weeks of summer vacation because we want to go to Jumeirah or to Petra or to Jeddah or whatever, but the overwhelming majority of this is also business travel. And that, of course, means that even if you are reliant on oil or if you're comfortable with oil, you still have that need for travel. Lastly, and I think that's something we'll probably talk about a little bit later, many of the countries, especially here in the region, are specifically using their oil proceeds to build new industries in anticipation of a future perhaps reduction of their oil reserves or the prices, right? And Saudi Arabia probably being the most prominent example, but it's something we see across the region. So you can say tourism or oil. If you're oil, you need to travel. If you don't have oil, you even need more travel.
Okay, that's very interesting. So let's look at, this is where we are. And now, given the circumstances, because of COVID, travel and tourism has been badly impacted. It's a known fact. So let's do some crystal gazing and talk about what are the opportunities and where do we see the Middle Eastern travel market from here. Let me get you in, Dr. Rifai, there. In the current circumstances and the new post-COVID world we live in, what are the opportunities you see for travel and tourism, especially when it comes to the Middle East?
Let's remember that in the Chinese language, the word opportunity and the word crisis are one word. So there are many, many opportunities that come out of it. One of the most important opportunities is the rise in importance of travel and tourism altogether. You know, as have been demonstrated by our previous good speakers, tourism is the oil that never runs out. It is, to me. It's a most important resource. The more we take care of it, the more it gives us. Now, one of the most important and significant outcomes of this has been the rise of domestic and regional tourism. We have been doing this not just out of need, it's out of principle. No country that's not enjoyed by its people first can be enjoyed or should be enjoyed by anybody from outside. We have not observed this principle for a long period of time. If you look at the United States and Europe, 70 to 75% of the traffic is domestic travel. So the rise in domestic tourism is an opportunity. The rising importance of technology and digital technology. Look at us. I'm speaking to you from Amman. As if I'm with you. I wish I was. But the rising technology has been tremendous importance. Third thing is the emphasis on security and safety, particularly hygiene security. These are all three opportunities that will come out of this crisis. We're going to get into a better mode of tourism for sure, the Middle East and worldwide. But the Middle East must start working together first, as I said. They must harmonize their procedure. They must get their act together first, like any other region in the world. This multilateral system is to be restored and rebuilt from bottom up, brick by brick. That's what I want to say at this point. Thank you so much.
There's an interesting point, Nicholas, which Dr. Rifai raised about domestic tourism or travel. Is this the way really right now that countries in this region can look at capitalizing or regional tourism? Something what Australia and New Zealand have done, for example, they've created this travel bubble. Is that something that can be done? Is it realistic in this part of the world where they can look at promoting, regional destinations, and that could help them tide over this, let's say, difficult phase for the industry?
So it remains to be seen, right? I mean, over the past 14, 15 months, domestic and regional tourism was an emergency necessity to say, I can't get my international visitors to come see me. Who else do I have available? And that was done across the world. Great examples in Thailand, here in the UAE, in Switzerland, in Saudi, all across the place, basically. They said, well, it's kind of nice. I have my captive clients and they want to go on holiday somewhere and they need to come to me, right? Now, it remains to be seen how that was delivered by the industry to the visitors. Did they use the opportunity to engage with people that usually would have gone abroad and stayed at home in a way of saying, I've created new loyalty, new brand perception, I was able to deliver new experiences, etc. So if they manage to actually make a good impression, if you will, then this would be an additional new segment. If they, on the other extreme of the spectrum, pretty much said, well, let me do a minimum thing, they got to come visit me anyway, I'll take them at the maximum price, and that has also happened in certain places, then they may have destroyed loyalty. So we will see. But I think what really did happen, and that was perhaps one of the few nice things out of an otherwise tragic situation, is many people across the world discovered their own country, right? And or their own residential place, right? And that certainly has all the ingredients of a potential future new segment. But it's not a guarantee. You got to work hard for it.
Scott, over the last 10 years, even before COVID, we have seen that a lot of countries, specifically in the Gulf region, let's say Saudi Arabia and even to an extent the UAE, they've been in the process of trying to diversify their economies, right? Move away from their dependence on oil. And for some of them, travel was really at the heart of this diversification, for example, Saudi Arabia. From that point of view, how do you see these countries going ahead with their plans of making travel an important pillar of driving their economies forward? Can they really go ahead with it now, or do you think COVID has now really put a huge restriction in terms of their plans, and they might have to wait it out before this can pick up?
Yeah, that's right, Samir. Travel and tourism is critical both to the short-term bounce back from COVID-19, but also the longer-term growth and diversification plans. And you're right, almost every diversification strategy, whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it's plans here, whether it's Oman, is very heavily dependent on travel and tourism. And on one hand, that is challenged by COVID, but on the other hand, it's an opportunity. This is new travel and tourism. These are new features. These are things that can be designed for the new realities of the post-COVID world. And we've seen, and I guess the other concern is that you have vision competition and travel and tourism competition, and that's a challenge. But in response to that, taking the second point first, you see across southern Europe, whole swathes of southern Europe with vibrant travel and tourism industries. And they're all different, all tailored to slightly different markets, and similar can be replicated within the Middle East. And as I said, travel and tourism is likely to be different post-COVID. It's maybe more focus on quality. Overcrowding was an issue prior to the COVID crisis. So that's an even bigger issue now. So travel and tourism, infrastructure, policies, destinations can adapt to that. And that presents still a significant opportunity to the sector to contribute to long-run growth and long-run diversification within the region.
Nicholas, Scott mentioned a very interesting point there about how travel is going to change post-COVID. And I want to specifically draw your attention to the Middle East market, because as we were discussing, a lot of countries have been focusing on travel and tourism to increase their revenues. What are the learnings in your experience that these countries are seeing now post-COVID? And, how has that changed their plans, say pre-COVID, in terms of the travel infrastructure or the strategy they were building around travel and tourism? And how's that going to change now going ahead?
I think it's first of all important to acknowledge that we're not out of the woods yet, right? Because even though the governments here in the regions have done a phenomenal job in creating trust, safeguarding their citizens and residents, and communicating quite transparently, that's only half of the travel equation, right? Because you also actually need people to be inbound. And there, it's a very diverse situation in many of the most important source markets of the UAE and of the ones that were also expected, for example, for KSA or for Egypt. If one speculates what should happen, I think we're going to see a few different trends. So I'm quite certain that a material part of the business travel will not come back again in the midterm, maybe never. And when we have these discussions, often it's very binary discussions, like there will be no more business travel or there will be the same as before, which of course is not true, right? It's always the truth in the middle. If I look at my 2018 and 19 business travel, probably 100 flights a year or so, I know exactly which 60 flights I want to go back to as quick as possible, and I also know which 40 I never want to go back to again, because either they were never very productive to begin with, or because I found new means of basically fulfilling the same purpose. And that should be a general conclusion or a general pattern. So business travel, I think we're going to have to look at different models. And for example, what happened here in the UAE, which I thought was very innovative, was, for example, to say, well, okay, maybe you don't need to travel so much for business anymore, so it doesn't really matter where you live. You might as well live in a cool place. And they did the digital nomad visas. They created other opportunities basically for people saying, well, if I'm working more and more remotely, where is the temperature nicer in February? Somewhere in Northern Europe or in Dubai. And there's different models across there. So that kind of travel will change simply because the budgets are no longer here. We've learned something new. On the let's say leisure travel, I am not yet convinced that anything will change at all. As a leisure traveler, we have a very short memory as a species, right? And yes, you're right. I mean, we had some really bad examples of over-tourism that were pretty much a topical area of discussion pre-COVID, but I would not be confident in saying that's not going to come back, because when you look at what people say and how they consume, there's often a gap between them. So if I had to make a prediction, I would say the majority of leisure travel in X years, whether X years is 3, 4, 5, I don't dare to say, will look pretty much like it looked before COVID.
That's interesting. You drew a distinction between how business travel is going to be not the same as it was, but leisure travel is going to stay the same. So that's an interesting point of view. Let me get in Dr. Rifai there. I don't know whether you heard comments from Nicholas, but if we were doing some crystal gazing and looking at the travel and tourism market, do you agree with his assessment that the leisure market could bounce back, look what it was pre-COVID, let's say in a few years from now, but business travel could be different and we may not see that many business travelers flying around the world and to this part of the world as well?
I 100% agree. 100% agree with him. But I want to say something here. There are 3 stages for recovery. Stage number 1 is keep the businesses alive. Governments have interfered in this. They've provided soft loans, they provided direct impact to keep them alive. Secondly, second stage was dependence on regional and domestic tourism, which I continue to say is a very, very important thing. Because although granted, domestic and regional tourism does not bring in hard currency or contribute to the balance of trade, it keeps shops alive, it keeps businesses alive. It's a very, very important element. Plus the principle, as has been said, principle of people knowing their country, taking pride in what they are. It's very, very important. Third thing would be international tourism. I'm not going to go into international tourism just directly, even with leisure. And that would start with digital nomads, as Nicholas just said. Digital nomads are a very, very important element here. And countries that realize and recognize this clearly, early in the game, would be benefiting. You need to adjust your visa system, you need to adjust your tax system. But most important also, is you need to give a peace of mind for people that are traveling to you. And that would be done through insurance policies, especially designed for the people that come in the COVID term. In other words, we should forge partnerships in the private sector, represented in the local providers of insurance and governments, to provide a special policy for people that have to come to a place. They would be treated for sure or repatriated if needed. That's one of the ways of keeping people peace of mind. People are not going to travel just because the government told them you can travel now. They will travel only if they feel secure. And that's not going to happen overnight. But I agree 100% with Nicholas. It's leisure travel that would bounce back first. And I think with some of the trends, as he said, some of the trends that we saw in the past may continue. They just may. But I'm hoping that we learn our lesson on sustainability, particularly over tourism, and we'd never go back to that model again. That's my hope. Thank you.
Scott, given that what we just discussed about how leisure travel could be the driving force now, not business travel, from that point of view, what do you think the countries in this region need to do from a strategy point of view, given their economic mix, to A, attract tourists in larger numbers, and B, attract investments going ahead?
To a degree, I think you probably need to split that into two phases. You've got the initial post-COVID recovery, so the next 18 months or so. If you look at the economics in the rest of the world, although COVID has hit economies really hard, households and consumers have been relatively well protected. And you see situations where savings ratios, so the amount of savings households around the world have risen significantly. And there's a good view and a good expectation in a number of parts of the world, US, parts of Europe, you could see a consumer boom. And that's likely to be in the higher end or higher income levels, which is positive for travel and tourism. So how do you capture that money? Initially, that's about being safe and open, making sure passengers feel confident and comfortable coming to destinations. And we saw at the end of last year where occupancy in Dubai was above year earlier levels, that travellers will come. So there's firstly that confidence attracting the money. Secondly, it's having the arrangements with governments, so you have the air corridors and you don't have to quarantine when you come back from places like the UAE and the rest of the Middle East. And that'd be critical for the region, capturing the recovery, capturing that extra money. Longer term, it's more challenging. I think you've already seen on the panel, there's a slight different perception on whether the leisure market will change. If the leisure travellers don't change, then it's very much more of the same, which is one approach. Personally, I think you probably need to hedge your bets a bit and think a bit more about quality travel. I think a lot of the market here is very much about relatively short-term visits. And given that we're a long-haul destination, I think one of the changes you may see in the market is fewer but longer trips. And if that is of eventuality, I think the region needs to think about what kind of investments it makes in order to have people staying here for 2 weeks rather than 5 days or 3 days before they go to Asia. And that's a critical factor. And the final thing really is you need to think how to deal with sustainability, and what sustainability is driven by the consumer and what's driven by policy. And they can be fairly different forces, different drivers with very different implications.
Nicholas, from taking that point forward, what Scott was talking about, and given that what you mentioned earlier, that leisure is going to be the driving force, from that point of view, do you think some countries in this part of the world are better placed than others to cash in on this opportunity going ahead?
So there's probably a number of answers to this one. So, for example, something which I feel is an advantage that the UAE has now is that they have made a maximum effort to provide safe international travel experiences throughout most of the pandemic continuously at a time where many other places were closed. So what has that created? That has, first of all, probably created goodwill with a lot of the source markets, saying thank you for giving us some relief and coming somewhere. It has probably created new markets of people that perhaps would not have considered coming to Dubai or to Ras Al Khaimah or so on, and decided to say, well, let me try it, and liked it. And something very important, it has kept the motor going. I mean, as the numbers from Gerald were shown before, show very quickly, I mean, this is a labor-intensive industry, right? And once you start shutting down everything, especially in the regions here where a lot of the colleagues that create our experiences in the hotels have then decided or were constrained for economic reasons to go back to their home countries, restarting is very, very difficult because you don't get access to the talent. And so I think the UAE has created a competitive position for itself by maintaining operations, being creative, and now being able to restart quickly. If you look at another example of what I believe has created a very good example of competitive, it's Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia, of course, in its non-business and non-religious tourism offering, so basically in its leisure tourism, is at a much younger stage, right? It only started becoming possible, I believe it was in September of 2019. What the kingdom has, I'm sure they didn't wish for it, but again, at least a good side effect of something that otherwise was very nasty. They got a year of practice run with their own citizens. And it was amazing. I mean, I have large teams in Saudi Arabia, and many of them shared with me that said, I went to places I've never been before, in Al Lula, in Al Juf, in Hail, in Jeddah. Well, Jeddah, many people went. So the advantage that the kingdom has been able to do is perhaps have one more year to deploy the large strategy, and at the same time have phenomenal practice run and local citizen branding locally. So those are the two examples, I think, of countries that have used the time in a way that probably should give them a competitive advantage. But just because I've not spoken about the other ones, I'm not sure they haven't. It's just the two that stood out for me.
Okay, that's interesting. I think the point you made about a practice run, especially in Saudi Arabia, would be interesting to see how that pans out once they open up the market.
There's millions and millions of domestic visits, and people that even now where they could travel and say, I'm going to go back there. So that's a very good result, an exceptional result.
Okay, so it could be an example for other countries to follow, probably in the region.
It goes back to our earlier discussion around domestic, right? If you want your citizens to stay with you, you need to engage them just as much as I mean, I'm from Switzerland originally. I know that our local tourism in Switzerland for many years had neglected the local Swiss citizen and tried to get as many from China, from Germany, from UK, because they had a higher spend, but they had a lower stay, right? Whereas if you really loyalize them, they actually also come at times where your international tourists can't, because there's no school holiday or we have flight restrictions again. So it's really going to be exciting to see how that dynamic and that bond stays or not.
Okay, that's interesting. So I have one more question to go, and then we are going to open up the floor for questions. So please ask your questions. If you're not comfortable to come there, you can send in the questions on the WhatsApp number. I think that's mentioned, and we'll get those questions asked. Finally, Dr. Rifai, one more lesson which the world has been talking about for a few years now, and I think that's it's been more under the spotlight over the last year, is the green economy, or green growth as it's called. And what the pandemic has shown us is that it's important to invest in it, in sustainability and in green growth. From that point of view, and specifically about the travel and tourism industry, given that it's at a crossroads over here in this part of the world, is that really a challenge for the countries when, if they start investing in sustainable hospitality and green growth? Because it's also a huge job generator in many countries in this part of the world. How do you see that? Is it an opportunity, or it could put some brakes on their growth plans?
It's an opportunity, but we should all agree on the definition of sustainability. To many people, I may find a bit offensive, but sustainability is not just about environmental sustainability or about climate change. Sustainability is about social, economic, and political sustainability as well. It's important to keep that in mind, because if we over-concentrate on the environment, which is very important, of course, sustainability is about sustaining life on Earth for future generations. And that is a comprehensive concept. It's not just about the environment. It's about how do people live, not just about life. It's about the quality of life. Sustainability is not about anti-growth or anti-progress. The population of the world is going to grow whether we like it or not. Nothing is going to stop. How do we bridge this dilemma between the population growth and the sustainability concept? We can only do that through progress and growth. Progress and growth are not anti-sustainable at all. Growth has been the story of mankind since its beginning, and it's important to keep that in mind. Now, with regard to the environment, yes, of course, it's important, because without good and healthy environment, there will be no life on it. There will be no sustainability. That's for sure. And it's important to invest in that. It's important to direct our policies towards that. We have an opportunity, golden opportunity now, to do this. Thank you.
Nicholas, how do you see this? I mean, there's a lot of focus on green growth now. From tourism industry point of view, is that I don't want to say obstacle, but a challenge really, when you're looking at growing a certain industry?
Yeah. So first of all,
It's a tricky one. Huh?
Honestly, I am skeptical or I had at least not observed the investors that I know across my portfolio or so accepting a different return on investment in the short term in exchange for a greener product in the real estate. Right? So I'm not seeing it yet. Right? There is a niche, absolutely, of, let's say, eco lodges and so on, where that is the DNA of the product. So there, of course, right? But I have not seen large moves yet in pre-COVID and during COVID. But right now, not a lot of people are building. That would lead me to believe in saying, oh, there's something really that is gaining traction beyond a niche. But I still do believe that it will come. The question is, who is going to pay for it, right? The consumer, the tourist, us tourists, we're a funny animal. When you ask in a survey, is sustainability important for you? Yes. Do you expect your hotel employees where you go to be treated fairly? Yes. Is carbon neutrality important for you? Yes. Are you willing to pay 5% more for your stay? No, that's the operator's problem, right? That's what we see in large shapes. So I have not seen that gap between the green investment developments and the propensity to pay from the consumer in large numbers. So I'm remaining a little bit reserved until I see it.
That's interesting. Do we have time to, Scott, very quickly, I mean, given that there's an emphasis now even in this part of the world from an overall economic point of view to look at sustainability in a big way, how do you think countries in this part of the world, because they are, many would say, late to the game, going to find it challenging when it comes to investing or looking at green growth?
I think every country is going to find it challenging because it costs more and the returns longer term, which is the kind of conundrum of every country in the world. I think the policymakers here have clearly demonstrated it's important, and it's an important part of their diversification strategy. And in some aspects, there's opportunity outside tourism. There's opportunities to embrace it, whether it's solar, whether it's hydrogen. There really is a good opportunity to become more environmentally friendly. And a bit similar to the comments I've made about tourism. Here, more than anywhere else in the world, a lot of the investment is ahead of us. So they're in a position to make choices about what they do. And if there's the policy will to make the choices, then it will happen. It's not a matter of they're trying to change existing infrastructure to fit a new world. They can design new infrastructure to fit a greener world. And early signs are policymakers are keen to do that. And I expect to see some of that over the coming years across the whole economy, not just tourism.
Okay, that's interesting. That's a good thought to end the discussion on. Now, Sharian, should we open the floor for questions, or are there some people who have...
Well, I think the floor has been open for discussions with the WhatsApp working very well. We've got fantastic feedbacks and lots of great comments thanking you for sharing your insights. If I may share a couple of questions from the audience.
Please.
Question number one from Rabah, Radisson Hotel Group. How do you see the level and efficiency of local governments in supporting tourism businesses and entities to stay alive, especially in the first 6 months of the COVID surge in the context of the UAE? And there were previously seen great examples, and I think maybe few of your knowledge to share with the rest.
Nicholas, you want to take that?
So if I understood the question correctly, is how do I assess the reaction in the first 6 months, the government response in the first 6 months?
Correct. Government's responses.
And the question was specifically about the UAE?
In the context of UAE.
I think it was pretty sweet, to be honest. I mean, look, and obviously during the first 6 months of COVID, I was primarily actually busy helping governments across the world deciding what the correct stabilization, rescue, and later impulse programs were, right? And I think it's the usual suspects. I mean, the UAE, Singapore, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, etc., were probably amongst the countries that each within its own means stabilized the industry, right? And that's all you could do at the beginning. I mean, it was an absolute, nobody had experienced it before, right? So I appreciate that every single market participant expects from his government always more.
Mm-hmm.
Me too, right? Like if government gives me 50, I say, why don't you give me 70? But I think looking back, this was about as well executed as it could have been.
Fantastic. So we have two quite similar questions, so I've combined them. And it's, when do we see the leisure market come back or kickstart?
That's a tough one. Huh? Let's ask. I'll go to Dr. Rifai first on that, maybe.
Yes.
Dr. Rifai, you want to take that one? When will the leisure market bounce back?
I think the issue of when is a very tricky issue. It's not just the leisure market. The leisure market is already back. I think it's back in its domestic form. It's back in its local form. And it will come back once governments start working together. We can't just over-depend on vaccination. This vaccination passport is really something that I'm very skeptical about, because it divides people between the haves and the have-nots. Some people can afford to vaccinate, some other countries cannot afford to vaccinate. Therefore, what the UAE is doing is very, very intelligent. They're simply depending on 72 hours testing and testing when you enter, which is by far much more important and much more effective than vaccination. I think vaccination is important, but to make it a condition is a very tricky thing. Therefore, if you really think about it, the world would need 5 years at least to vaccinate the entire population of the world for 70%. And the world will not get started unless the world is vaccinated. Travel and tourism has that characteristic. You can't have countries that are vaccinated, countries that are not vaccinated. You can't receive people from countries that are not vaccinated, so on and so forth. So the issue of when depends on how serious each government is in looking at these procedures. And the seriousness has to be done in two ways. Number one is coordinating with your neighbors first, and then with long-term destination, creating a bubble in a corridor. Two, depends on the exact procedure. Testing, I think, making it more affordable, more available, is by far much more realistic than insisting on only vaccination. You could have passports that say vaccine, and or testing, not just vaccination. Thank you so much.
Scott, you want to take quickly?
Yeah, so if based on our forecast of Oxford Economics, you look at a chronology for the recovery. If you look at domestic tourism, that's pretty much back already. If you look at, say, next to recover, it would be regional tourism, so within the Middle East. I would expect that to be back to 2019 levels some point next year. The longer haul travel and tourism will take longer to recover, and that's probably sometime in 2023 until we're back to pre-crisis levels.
Okay. So that's the answer from The Economist.
Now, tying in quite well with the last comment, there's another concerned, I think, hotelier. What are the obstacles that we foresee in Q1 of the year 2022 in the tourism and hospitality sector? Or maybe an insight or an advice. What do we look forward to and what do we are skeptical about?
So basically, we're looking at the short-term outlook, really, if we talk about 2022. So you want to take that first?
So, first of all, sorry, but we don't know, right? But we can probably describe some of the signs that you may wish to look for, and then adjust your strategy and your yield management and your preparations. Speaking about the region here, perhaps also slightly reacting to what Taleb just had said before. Ultimately, Q1 2022, which let's remember that's going to be in the middle. I mean, I presume this is for I mean, did you hear it's for UAE or for?
I think it was not mentioned, but
Let's make it regional. The easier you make access, the quicker we get back to levels that there's no reason that they should not be at the same levels that they have been before. And there, I think we need to prepare ourselves to have, or the governments need to prepare themselves for several avenues. And so I'm not quite as dogmatically skeptical about the vaccination pass as what Taleb had said before. I agree that this should probably not be a mandatory only way to get into a country, but I see the vaccination pass, for example, very much like what we have as a smart pass at Dubai airport or Fastgate in the US. For many people, having a vaccination pass is okay. I would be very happy to sign up for such a program, but that doesn't mean that I say you must as well. But if this gives me more flexibility, I will travel faster again, right? Other options, such as saying, well, keep on bringing your COVID. Let's try to make the COVID tests more affordable. Maybe certain safe corridors, New Zealand. It's always going to be an array of measures that together produce the best results while preserving the sensitivities both of the host nation and the outbound nation, right? And so looking at Q1, I think the question was 22. I would look first of all, I would look at this summer. How are the mega events of this summer going to play out? I'm very interested to see how Tokyo Olympics gets on the road. We're then going to be looking more in the learnings from there on and see how are we going to improve our learnings from there if we need to improve, and how is the reception of the population and of the visitors going to be for example, Expo. So you have to take it step by step. But if we don't have a fifth and sixth wave, if vaccination continues, and if we create these easy access measures, then I think Q1 2022 could be very, very close already to what we've seen pre-COVID. That was a very long answer, sorry.
Okay, Hope. No, I think you answered it pretty much in the end. Are there any more questions, or are we done? There's one more?
I believe there's one last question
Yes,
for this
please.
panel.
The mic is there right in the middle. Yeah. Please tell your name and then whoever you want to shoot the question to.
Check. This feels like the X Factor auditions. Okay. By the way, my name is Joseph, and I'm a student in one of the aviation universities. And while we were in this pandemic situation in 2020, and we had contacts with the seniors, and when we asked them how's the job market and how are you doing along with this pandemic, they said we got a result that none of them had got into any industries or had any career prospects because of this pandemic situation. And we also learned that some of the companies which are related to the tourism and aviation industry, um, they were cutting off people, and more than 50% of people lost their jobs, and everyone is aware of this in newspapers and everything. My question is, like, we as fresh graduates who will be entering the field tomorrow, um, is there any hope or is there any light beside this pandemic? And if there is, what can we as young, ambitious people do to help this industry overcome the situation and make this industry come back on its feet?
Okay, I'll go to Dr. Rifai. You have a young student here who's from the hospitality, looking to start a career in the hospitality industry. What do you want to tell them? Is there hope, as he says, for young graduates like him?
Definitely there is. You should think outside of the box. You should not limit your thinking to the traditional way of thinking. In other words, let's think about it this way. The hospitality industry is not the most innovative industry in the world. Let's all remember that we were able to put a man on the moon before we were able to put 2 wheels on a suitcase. That's how conservative our industry is, and slow and moving. Now, for young people, I think you should start thinking outside of the box. You should start catering for domestic tourism that needs thinking outside of the box. You should start catering for different vacation times, for different moods, for different cultures. This is one way. The second thing is we should also try to be innovative about how to bring in international tourists. I said again, digital nomads are good stuff. Digital nomads here, person that stays for 10 days, one person, instead of having 10 people staying for 1 day. So that's a very, very important aspect. I think you should be optimistic. I think I'm very optimistic about our industry. Don't give up, please. Please.
The words of encouragement from Dr. Rifai. But quickly, Nicholas and Scott, short answers. How do you see the outlook in terms of the job market bouncing back, especially for tourism? You want to take that, Nicholas, first, maybe?
Sure. So this is one of the biggest strategic risks that's coming at the hotel and travel industry, which we have not fully grasped yet, which is the fact that for honorable but nevertheless brutal reasons, we had across the world to cut an unbelievable amount of jobs in the hospitality, tourism, airline, cruise line industry. I would think a good third of those people that were cut have had enough of hospitality and tourism forever, and have used the COVID time to either develop themselves further or to inform themselves further to basically go to what they consider a more stable job. So that has a good and a bad element to it. That probably means that as it ramps up again, and you can see that in the US, for example, right now, they're really struggling to finding talent. So as soon as, I would say, demand increases, the negotiation power of the employee, I believe, is better post-COVID, at least in the short term, than pre-COVID. At the same time, and I've spent the first 10 years of my career in hospitality operations, and I loved it. But looking back at it now and looking at the situation right now, I would like to have a better understanding what my employer is going to do me to keep me marketable, developed. To Taleb's point on talent, how he basically keeps me educated and how I keep myself educated continuously, so that it's always a choice to work in hospitality rather than an obligation because I'm no longer marketable. So short answer is, you should be fine, but you want to make sure that you always control your own destiny. That basically means your learning will never stop. And it's learning that should be applicable to several industries so that you have options.
So there's hope. I hope you got your answer. There is hope, and stay positive.
Yes, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for, I think, giving hope and also a bigger understanding of what everybody else in the industry is thinking and also going through. So thank you so much. And I'd like to have the audience join me in a big round of applause. Thank you very much.